Now is our time. We have, I wanted to give an intro to Mayor Larry Chu. Larry grew up in Daly City. He graduated from UC Berkeley in 1979 and got his first job in Tiburon. He also obtained an MBA from SF State University. Professionally, he's worked in the financial services industry, primarily related to technology, compliance, finance, accounting. In 1982, he moved to Corte Madera and then to Larkspur in 1988, where he continues to reside with his wife, daughter, and son. He coaches Little League, girls softball, and girls softball. But most importantly, he's a Warriors fan. Yeah. So, everybody give a hand for Mayor Larry Chu.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm a Giants fan, I'm a 49er fan, and for you Oakland Raiders people, well, sorry, you can't hear after. Yeah, I'll probably say a few things today that either will test your abilities or make you a little uncomfortable. That's okay. It's Jeff, thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure and honor to be asked to be your keynote speaker for this year on your second anniversary, so congratulations to Maple and this organization. Yeah, Jeff gave a little bit of background about myself. How people ask, what are you? And I've been asked if I'm Eskimo, I've been asked if I'm Filipino, a number of different Southeast Asian ethnicities, but never Chinese because of my darker complexion. And probably because we have some family roots that go back to Macau. So that's a Portuguese colony. Was that on the list? I don't know if they're a country anymore. Anyway, we can trace our family heritage on my mother's side back to about the 1850s. And, you know, they effectively are native Californians working on the railroads the same way that a lot of Chinese immigrants did in the day. And they've been here in San Francisco ever since, so pretty much my whole family on both sides. My dad's side came over in the 1920s with my grandparents, and you know, all my aunts and uncles are also native San Franciscans. I think people say, well, why did you become mayor? Really, you don't get elected as mayor in a small city like Larkspur and 10 of the other cities other than San Rafael. The mayor is elected by the council for a one-year term, or could, for Larkspur, it's a one-year non-consecutive term. So each city treats it a little different. I did run for council, which is a 4-year elected position, but that took a lot of pulling and cajoling and a number of other things, because I'm a really private person. You know, I have my Asian heritage, which I'll get into a little bit later, but you know, I don't like being out there in front. For me, it's a lot of role play, and it was something I had to overcome. And you know, I didn't have a problem speaking. I just don't like talking about myself. So I'll get through that part real quick. But you know, it took me, I think, 6 conversations with somebody who was on the council at the time and said, "Would you run for, you know, city council? And think that you could serve in the community in different capacities, that you'd probably do okay." So I finally, after the 6th time, rather than say all the different reasons why I didn't want to do it, I could finally say, well, maybe there might be some things that I would like to do to try and make a difference in my community. So that was 11 years ago, and at this point I have to decide if I want to do more than 12 years since I come up for election at the end of 2015. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. But in terms of, you know, my background, what do I do as mayor? Well, it's really just kind of a chairman of the board position. We have what's called a council manager government. So we have a full-time city manager that runs the staff, runs the city, and everything else on a day-to-day basis. We just deal with the fiduciary and the policy center for the city. You know, strong mayor government like San Francisco, you know, they elect Ed Lee and he runs the city. So there's some slight variations within different forms of government. You know, we tend to be providing our residents with just the basic services: police, fire, library, park and rec, planning. And, you know, all that stuff just kind of runs on its own with, you know, our city staff, much the way that you do at the county, but it's much broader scope. You have a lot more different services you have to provide for the residents here in this county. So, if there were some big issues we have to deal with, I would say that they're no longer small things that are just with Larkspur. You hear a lot of things come up and they'll say, oh, yeah, we hate the traffic. Or they'll say, you know, you got too many houses, or there's not enough water. All these things are really not Larkspur issues. And, you know, we've realized that for a number of years now, and all the cities are working as collaboratively as possible with the county, because these are county-wide problems and they're county-wide solutions. So it's been a good experience working with you know, supervisors, and there are a number of familiar faces in here where I've also worked with staff on, you know, projects and things like that. Now, in terms of what it is I do, well, yeah, I think in terms of personally, everybody needs to bring their own style to what it is that they do. And, you know, that's typically defined by your experiences, your education, your cultural background, your social and professional affiliations. So for me, it's like I've been associated with the Boy Scouts for 50 years. Started at 9 years old, haven't left the program. I coach sports. You heard a few things there, but I've also done it all the way up to the Division I level as a volunteer assistant with San Jose State a number of years ago. So I was drafted in 1974, even though after I reported, they sent us home because Saigon fell and brought everybody home. But those are the kind of institutions that create part of who I am. And you draw from those experiences and your personal interest and things you gravitate towards, and that's what effectively establishes your style of leadership. Now, people talk about the born leader. There are certainly people who are very charismatic. The one that comes to mind in recent years, you know, if you look at a president, it's probably Bill Clinton, because he could draw a crowd. People listen to him. He can do bad things and people still listen to him. Okay, and that's, you know, that's the type of draw that he has. The interesting thing is, you know, there's another type of leader, I guess. There's kind of like the celebrity leader. We've seen a couple of those in California, you know, in recent as well as a little more in the distant past, former president and all. But they have that same charismatic kind of draw. Does that make them a good leader? Well, history can decide that. We won't have that debate. But leadership is, in large part, your skills, and you learn those skills. And one of the things you need to then pull together is that you have things that are part of you and things that you learn, and how are you going to put all this together to make it in a working style that works for you and that you're also effective. I think one of the challenges, and I'll just address the cultural side, is a lot of times people ask me, how is it that Asian Americans are not able to get into higher levels of executive management? And that's, in part, it's cultural on both sides, and that's my belief. We, being the American culture, we are independent thinkers. We are entrepreneurial, no boundaries. There's this always been a culture of kind of a cowboy-like mentality. So if you don't exhibit that type of persona, you may not be perceived as a leader. So Asian culture, I know with me, Uh, you know, you're taught to be humble. You don't talk about yourself. You don't talk about your accomplishments. As I tell my kids, I don't want to hear any trash talking out there. I want to see your dad do the talking, not you. You know, so there's an element of a lot of times not being noticed, one, and the second thing is that they may not perceive you as having what it takes to motivate people or to get them to do things. You know, and I guess in some ways I can compare that to the Southern culture. Gettysburg, some historians might point to, was lost on a suggestion that one general made to another. Now, Southerners don't like to give direct orders either. But the other guy took it as a suggestion and didn't do it. So the South lost the high ground, and effectively their ability to, they could have beaten the North at that battle. So yeah, that's just an example of how you have clashes in culture as well as language. Now, one of the things that Jeff and Tom, when I first met with them, wanted to talk about is that a number of people want to get to the point where, from a career and personal development standpoint, it's what do you need to do to get to that next level? I'm going to say three different things, and it's not meant to be disparaging, but I kind of group things. There's some functions that are more administrative, and those roles are policy procedures rules. Then you have more of a management function. Okay, you're looking at process efficiencies and how to do things right. When you get to the point of leadership, it's about motivating people, having a vision, working towards a vision, objectives, getting from point A to point B, and it's also about doing things right. Doing things right, doing the right thing as opposed to doing things right. So then, if these next few things, I'm just going to be like throwing out a bunch of concepts, and I could probably speak for an hour or more on each of these because they are presentation topics that I've had to give in the past. But you have skills, and those are your strengths. And then you have things that are differentiators, in which are things that have some value. So when you look at what you do for an organization or what you do for the person that you report to, where are the elements that are both? Take an inventory, and you have your strengths and your differentiators. Okay, now, the things we know that most supervisors value are, can you make quality decisions? Do you have good perceptiveness? Are you good at problem solving? And how well do you do when you are given contradictory goals and being able to sort that out so that you can do what it is that you're supposed to do, and also what the broader organization is trying to do. So there's some, and then there's the real basic things. I mean, they do studies all the time. What are good characteristics of a good leader? Well, integrity is always at the top. I mean, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, you're no good to anybody. It's not about being honest or dishonest. We already know that there's a clear boundary there, so we assume everybody is honest in terms of what they do. It's about being trustworthy. Second thing is it's about having good forward thinking. Can you see what the end is and be able to work yourself back to where you are and be able to bridge the two? So you know, besides that, there's being prepared, as the scout said, you know, being able to anticipate what could possibly happen. Third thing is competence, different from skills. You have skills. Question is whether you can use those skills in a manner in which you are competent. And of course, the fourth, when you start to combine them all together, is how do you use all that to inspire those who work for you in order to get your individual and collective goals accomplished. So in that general context, where I find that there are, let's just say, skills, but they tend to be undervalued, it's what sports people call the X factor, okay, the intangibles. So what, as you start to take your inventory, what intangibles do you bring that will be of value to your organization? And the two big things that I always like to focus on is, one is command presence. Okay, you don't have to be up there like a general, but you need to get to the point where if you are going to assume a leadership position, that when you need to give a directive, whether it's direct or indirect, that people actually will follow. Okay, now that doesn't come automatic. As we all know, leadership, respect, everything, that's all earned. And that's where you tend to bring back some of the ball team analogy stuff. You know, every once in a while I'll have a discussion with some kids and I'll say, I can tell you 12 ways you get hit with a baseball and the reasons why. And one of them, if you follow pro baseball, is that pitchers need to protect their players and teammates. Okay? So if something happens to a teammate, a pitcher is almost obligated to throw at the next downer for the other team. Okay? Maybe not sportsmanlike, but there are unwritten rules. But those are the things that a manager needs to be able to do, is that they need to be able to provide all the resources and be the facilitator for allowing their workers to get their job done. They also need to protect their workers. You know, you get criticism. You know, you're going to stand up for those people that work with you and work for you. I remember when I had to contemplate going into the military, and my first thought was, you know, because they always talk about what you want to do, what your goals are, and all that. I couldn't see myself progressing beyond a captain or major's level. And that's because one of the things that I was taught when I was playing sports is, one, you don't do anything that you wouldn't tell a teammate to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. Okay, the other thing is that you're in there. Okay, you send people in the battle, you go in the battle too. So that, for the middle, is where you start to garner a lot of the respect and the cohesiveness in your team building. Of course, I have a flaw. I'm highly competitive. One of the things I'll add to that is I hate to lose. And I always want the best people on my team. Okay. Whether you can achieve that or not, that's what you're always looking for, though. And I never look at the skills. Anybody can do the job. You know, if they're an accountant, you know, they've got the technical skills. If they didn't, they wouldn't have had the previous job. But you look for those intangibles. One of the biggest, and the second thing, I'll get back to it now. The second biggest thing that I look for is situational awareness. How good is a person able to ascertain the situation that they are in and to come up with something where they can basically adapt, improvise, and overcome, as one branch of the military would say. And that's all key to being an effective follower as well as an effective leader. So it's tough to be in the middle. And, you know, the things that you need to focus on, particularly besides looking at where you have intangible skills and get them to the point where they're noticed, is mind blank. That's what happens when you're 59. Is that I'll get there. Anyway, I'll come back to it. But the whole aspect of having things that aren't necessarily valued, you know, for your quick learner. Jeff read my background, and there are a lot of different things. I know that's one of the things that's not highly valued anymore. Everything has gone to specialization. But nobody looks at the full package, and you need to deal with resources on a day-to-day basis. And clearly, you know, you're going to hire, you know, 3 people when you see that one person can do 2 or 3 things, or reorganizing, you know, department or work group in order to be more flexible. So, you know, those are the things you need to think about, and then you start to quantify that. Those things create value to the person you report to, as well as, you know, the organization in whole. And, you know, there's just one thing I blanked on, and the last thing I'd like to kind of leave as a thought before I take some questions is, do you know when you need to lead and when you need to follow? Because you are kind of right there in the middle. Believe it or not, your ability to follow actually makes you a better leader. Because if I didn't need to hire you to do this job because I thought I could do it better, then why would I need to hire you? That's the whole idea of the team building aspect, which I was saying that I want people on my team who are the best at their position. Okay, so what's really hard to do is to let go and to let these people do their jobs. And even when there are circumstances, right on the fly, you could have to flip that. Jeff mentioned I was in a compliance capacity. One of the things we have to deal with is business continuity planning, which is disaster preparedness. But believe me, when we trigger that disaster program, things do get flipped around. Our CEO is not at the top of the list. Can't even remember if he was close or not. But the fact is, you have other people in the organization who have to step up because that's what their expertise is, and that's what they've been trained to do, and that's what they're supposed to be doing in that specific circumstance. So, you know, again, I think the biggest emphasis in terms of personal and career development, I'll leave you with this last point, is that you cannot be a good leader until you learn to lead yourself. Okay, and the whole aspect of self-leadership comes from very simple things, like knowing when something should be done. You know, you prioritize things. You know, how do you determine what's urgent and what's important and what's not? Being able to separate that out, and what might be urgent and important to me might not be to you. So if you come to me one day and say, I need to get this done right now because Matthew Connell says I have to have it done. And, you know, you might have to find a way to finesse yourself out of that. But if you have things that are more urgent and important, and you can justify and rationalize that, you know, you'll get the support for that. What I'm saying is that, you know, boundary setting, priority setting, you know, knowing where you want to be, all those aspects personally need to be developed within your own skill set to do yourself, and then you take it to the next level where you can start to do it with others. Okay, like I said, I probably went through a lot of stuff, and each one of these topics, one session that I've done goes 6 days. So there's a lot of content here, but I'm willing to take some questions. If not, I'll leave also my business card up here. You can email me any questions you feel that you don't want to ask in public. But, thank you for the opportunity for addressing me.
Thank you, Mayor Chu. Any questions?
Actually, I have a question. In terms of your government work, what are some issues with Larkspur that are difficult that the county is involved with? What all of us are county workers. We want to work together with the town of Larkspur to some degree. What are some issues that are up and coming, emerging issues?
I think I mentioned probably the 3 biggies at this point. Traffic, housing, water. We have, I think, too much of each. No, not enough the last one. Okay. Too much traffic, too much housing, not enough water. So, I mean, those are all, that's not, I could bluntly say, at least on the traffic thing, that's not a Larkspur problem. Neither is the housing, because we haven't had any population growth in a decade. But yet there's tons more cars and a larger shortage of homes. So, higher demand primarily because there are just more people. But you also have a desirable location that you want to be in. And on top of it all, those who can't afford to live here have to commute from further. So, they tell us from the state level, you've got to reduce your greenhouse gases, and then we say, well, 62% of vehicular traffic is not from Larkspur. We can't control what happens on basically at the crossroads of the 2 most traveled roads in the county. So we have been working very close with Transportation Authority and the county planners and everything, and we're addressing it as a regional problem and a regional issue.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes.
Larry, I thought you were heading to answering a profoundly relevant question, namely, what does it mean for someone with an Asian American background to achieve the stance of leadership and get recognized in the larger culture? And then you kind of veered away from that. Are there specific lessons about your heritage that you could transmit to the members of Maple?
That's a tough one because it's kind of individualized. First of all, I think for me, you have to have attitude. Okay, and historically, I was raised by parents who felt a lot of discrimination when they were growing up because they were in San Francisco, and Chinese weren't recognized as citizens until about 1948, give or take. So I never experienced it personally from growing up in Daly City, but the thing that I have when I talk about attitude is I think that regardless of how an individual feels about their, let's say, being subordinate to a culture or a whether it be a corporate culture or a social one, is that you need to go in with the attitude that you're as good, if not better, than they are. See, at 5'7" and at the time probably about 160, 165 pounds, I don't garner a lot of on-field respect for anything. Okay, I had to do it better. And in the play yard, I had to get to the point where I'm not raising my hand, but people want to kick me first. Okay, and that is demonstrated by what you do day to day. But it also has to get noticed. So if, I said, one of the things I said was if you feel like now I'm getting outside your comfort zone, you do have to let people know in subtle and also less subtle ways that you're contributing, and these are the skills I bring, both tangible and intangible, and that although I don't demonstrate it in the same way outwardly that someone else does, that you still need to communicate that. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and feel like you're not being recognized. And that's regardless of whether that element is a race thing in terms of ethnicity and culture, or it's just something else. You know, you just happen to feel like you're not being noticed by your supervisor. You know you can do your job, and you know you have the confidence to be able to do your job. So let that confidence come out. Okay, that is probably easier said than done, but for me, that's the part I had to get to. In terms of running for public office, for example, I had to get to the point where I had to overcome a general desire to not be in front of people talking about, say, my position or opinion on something. You know, that's just not how I was raised. That's why, as I said, it's role playing. So if it doesn't work for you, you need to have kind of like I call my evil twin Skippy. Okay, I'm sure people, maybe not in this room, but some people have seen that. But you do have to create some mechanism that will allow you to demonstrate what you can do and the confidence to be able to do it.